All right, welcome back. I mentioned before, this is the Professor Nick Show, by the way. I mentioned at the end of last episode that we're going to record a bonus podcast here with Lawrence. This is Lawrence Joss from Surfaces USA. And this one is going to be, it's also going to be business oriented because this is a Professor Nick podcast for my business classes here at Ventura College. But this one is less focused towards business as a topic and more focused on your specific industry and your expertise, which is the stone industry and what you've come across in your adventures and in your journey there. So the questions for this one, they're not going to be specifically about, relationship building, which I'm sure we'll get into anyways, or expanding and growing in these things and change. It's much more focused on the industry that you're in. So again, for the people watching and listening out there, Lawrence's business is in stone and in tile and in slabs, but it's so much more than that because I've been to your warehouse and I've heard you talk about it. So the first question that everybody wants to know is, why stone, man?
So that's actually a fun story. I immigrated from South Africa, and our first business that my family got into when we were here was the deli business.
Okay.
So
the South African deli business?
It was a Jewish New York deli that had moved out from like the Bronx or something like that, and we're out here in California, and slicing lox, slicing whitefish, selling bagels, and hard industry. And my dad met someone in the tile industry.
Okay.
Right? So he decided to get out of the restaurant business, takes an apartment and opens up a tile store. 15 years old, I started working there because I'd been working at the restaurant since maybe I was like 11 or 12. And I started learning how to do everything. And then an opportunity comes after we have the big earthquake in 94, and I open up my own store. And it's just ceramic mostly at the beginning with a little bit of stone. And then based on some relationships I built, I ended up buying a Brazilian granite company.
Okay.
And this Brazilian quarry owner had opened up a store for his son in America, and very narrow focus where they were just selling Brazilian stones. So literally they were selling 20 options, period, in the whole store, and they weren't making it. Yeah. And I had an opportunity to buy out their company and take over their store, and I went out and got some creative financing, and that's how I started in the stone part of the business.
Okay, gotcha. And I know that business has taken you on a number of interesting adventures, some of them around the world. You started to tell me a story recently about an experience in Carrara, Italy. And I only got a few minutes of it, and I think we both kind of paused and agreed that would be a great story to tell here on this podcast. So would you mind retelling that story? But give us more, right? How did you end up in Italy, I believe, which is where you were at? Why were you there? What were you doing there? What led you to it? And then what unfolded?
Okay. So I went on a student exchange program when I was like 19 or something. So I'll land up in London and going to school. And in Carrara every year they have a stone show. It's known every single year. In Carrara, like all the white materials come out of Italy, and that became the center hub for the stone shows, and people would come from all over the world, set up booths, and it would be the stone industry. So when I was at school, my dad was going to the tile show, and he's like, hey, you want to come to Italy and meet us and see what this looks like? And I'm like, sure.
Yeah.
Like, hey. So I land up in Italy and meet some of the Italian suppliers. The guy that actually owned the process in place with the Carrara, his name was Lorenzo. And so we go out for our 7-course meal. And then the next day he's like, I'm going to take you up to the Carrara quarry. I'm like, yeah, right? You jump in a car, you drive up a little hill, you land up somewhere. So we get in the car and we start going up this mountain. And literally the road to me at that time felt like this wide, like we could get on the road and maybe there was an inch on either side. And literally you're driving up this road and then you see like the cloud cover. And you're like, okay, you know what I mean? And at 19, I wasn't really scared of anything or whatever. You don't feel like, nothing's ever going to happen to you. So we drive on this road, we pop up through the clouds, And then the road keeps going, and you see these big trucks starting to barrel down the road. So literally somewhere there's like a little turnoff, and these big trucks go by with these huge blocks of marble in the back. So we get further up, and we land up at the quarry. And the quarry is this massive thing that they've been mining for hundreds of years. The material for the Michelangelo actually came out of the Carrara quarries, and you're above the cloud layer, and they're still using dynamite, and they're breaking off blocks. And what a block really looks like, it looks like a really big loaf of bread. And they cut these big loaves of bread, and they throw them on these trucks that were barreling down the road, and they take them down to a processing plant. So we're up there, we're taking pictures. There's a lot of moisture because we're above the cloud, and they're blowing stuff up, and it's like a monstrosity. Like when you're looking at it, like you're like this small, and then there's like this huge mountain behind you, and it's cut down in levels as they've been mining these blocks out of it. You can see literally how the mountain's getting cut away over the course of time. And like that was my first time that I ever visited a quarry, and I was like, whoa.
And so you're saying that this is the same materials that Michelangelo used for like a sculpture of David back in the day, hundreds of years ago, and this is the stuff that's now going on people's countertops.
Yeah, and there's several Carrara quarries, but same material, same everything, same region of Italy that it came out of, because that's where the Carrara quarries are. And it's interesting, just to give you a little glimpse of what the market looks like today. Carrara, Statuario, Calcutta all come out of the same region. They're different variations of white marbles. They were really, really popular and really high-end materials, 60s, 70s. And then white became not so popular, and was probably for like 10, 15 years inexpensive to buy, a tremendous amount. And then this whole shift happened within design and the colors we used, and everything started to turn to white and gray. And now the Carraras and the Calcuttas are the most expensive materials out there. There's not enough material, so it's that part of the evolution of the material is really interesting.
So let's stay on that a little bit more. Styles change, tastes change. When my wife and I redid our kitchen a couple years ago, a number of folks, the folks at the tile store, the interior designers, the builders, the people that were working on it, all were pushing us towards granite. Now I take that back. The first stone store that we went to, they were really pushing quartz on us, I believe, because it was really popular a couple of years ago, and then people started pushing granite on us because it's hard, it's not going to chip, it's not going to stain, and so on and so on. And what they were telling me is that the marble will chip because it's a little bit softer, and it also will stain. And then I started to hear some people talk, and this was before I actually met you, saying that that's actually like when you go to these palaces in Venice, one of the charms is that you've got these 200-year-old red wine stains on these white marble countertops, and that's the charm, is that they actually absorb the color and change over time. I don't know if I've misheard my information, but I guess my question is, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 2 years ago, what was popular then? What's popular now? Why has it changed? Why granite versus marble? Why marble versus quartz? Why white versus gray versus dark versus blue? What can you share with us about some of these trends and how they change?
And it's a really interesting thing to note about the trends. We on the West Coast are relatively slow. A lot of these trends start to happen in Europe before they ever happen here, like where they're actually manufacturing stuff. And then it trickles down to the East Coast, to the West Coast, and then the center of the country just slowly starts to catch up.
Sure.
So a tremendous thing that's happened over the last several years is technology, right? Like the technology that used to take me 6 or 7 years to get from Italy to start seeing all the trends and start seeing people starting to play with some of these materials now takes a nanosecond. Right now I see pictures from Italy, from Argentina, from Spain, from anywhere, and I'm seeing what different people are doing, how they're using the material, what ways they're being creative, what colors they're using. So now this whole thing where you used to have this like 7 to 10 year life cycle to pull you into something, this is happening incredibly quickly. So because of the technology, you see the trends changing much, much sooner. And the interesting thing with the actual material, it comes back to technology also. So granite used to be the thing to use for countertops About 10 or 12 years ago, an Israeli company came out and they started selling quartz. And I don't know exactly how it worked, but for the first 2 or 3 years when they were distributing it within the United States, they had exclusivity. They were the only company in the whole of the United States selling this material. It was a company called Caesarstone. I think they went public now, but I'm not 100% sure. And once people started to see the success of a quartz, which is a manufactured product, it's made with resin and some stone dust and something like that, and it's put together, and it's kind of like a plastic. Like a traditional slab, if you lay it flat like this and it bumps on a truck, it breaks. Quartz, you lay it flat and it bumps like this and nothing happens, right? Technology again. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? You know what, it's a different thing. So granite's becoming obsolete in a lot of stuff. Like when granite used to be 90% of the countertops I would sell, granite's now 2 or 3% of the countertops I would sell.
Interesting.
You know, quartz was probably 80% of the countertop. And again, technology. The technology keeps getting better and better. The screens that they use on the material, the way that they make every single slab or piece of material different, looks very, very authentic. You know, and unless you're someone that's educated in the material, when you're looking at it, you're like, hey, this serves my purpose. It's bulletproof. It doesn't stain. It doesn't burn. Great.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, we're happy enough with what we chose. You know, the contractor, the guy who did our kitchen, you know, he suggested looking at granite, and we found a piece of stone that we love, and to this day, I really, really like it. Granite's also really hard material, right? So here's the great reason that I love it. When I watch my wife cut up a lime on the countertop and not use a cutting board, I think to myself, thank goodness we ended up with that granite. I always use the cutting board. And I can say that because she'll never watch this podcast. So hi, honey, if you're watching, but I know you aren't. So I'm glad we ended up with a really hard material, because with kids and with my wife cutting directly onto the countertop, I could see us just killing a piece of nice marble and regretting the investment into that. Because the other nice thing too about the granite is, you know, relatively speaking, it was inexpensive compared to some of the other options. So
yeah, and the neat thing about a natural stone is it's unique, right? You might get a granite that's consistent and you'll get a similar shade again from that same quarry. But if you buy a granite or a marble that has a lot of variation, a lot of movement to it, you're buying a piece of art.
Yeah.
It came out of the ground, it was polished out of the ground, it's been down there for thousands of years, and now it's on your countertop.
Yeah.
You know?
And it is. It's completely unique, and it's beautiful, and it's very, very different. And, you know, grays and blues and like some dark brown, black type, you know, stripes through there. And I don't think anybody has a stone, you know. I think it was called Lenin. Lenin? Is that what it was? But we looked at 3 pieces of linen, and they were all different. So that's the part of it that I thought was cool, is that we were getting that unique, you know, piece of stone on our countertop.
Very cool.
So, okay, so we talked a little bit about styles. Specifically with Carrara, has anything else changed in this region over the past 10 or 20 years?
So it's a really interesting question. And just going back to this idea of this big loaf of bread. So these trucks bring these big loaves of bread that they just blew off the mountainside, and they come down the hill and they come to a production facility. At the production facility, they take this big loaf of bread and it goes in a saw. And the saw kind of looks like a bread slicer, where it's slicing with multiple blades at the same time, and it's slicing all the way through the material. Once they've cut through the whole block, they literally open up 2 slabs that are face to face like this, and they polish them.
Yeah.
And then these become book matched. And what book match means is basically just a reflection of each other.
Okay.
So like if you're doing like a countertop, or you're doing like a wall, like this piece would literally connect in the exact same place as this piece, because it's book matched. And if it wasn't book matched, you wouldn't be able to keep the veins going in the same direction.
Cool.
So they take this material, they polish it, they stick it back together. They put some, we call them bundles, where they're actually putting like, it looks like like paper clips on both sides to hold the bundles together, and they stick it in a container and they ship it to us. You know, so the thing that's really changed is supply and demand. There's not a lot of supply, and there's a huge demand. Prices have gone up 300-400% over the last 7 years, I would say.
Jeez. And
the interesting thing about Italy is the stone business is so subsidized by the government that they're paying 2-3%, 4% on their money. Where if you look like a country like India or a country like Brazil, they're paying 21% on their money. So the Italians actually go out to these different countries and they buy raw material, the bread loaves, and they bring them back and they process them in Italy. They stamp made in Italy, and then they ship them all over the world, and they charge 30% more than this other country that has all this inflation. They also get to buy the premium blocks. So what happens with some of the materials is the material before Carrara that was really, really popular was beiges. So switch from beiges to whites. And the Italians now are buying white materials from Turkey, from China, from some places in the Middle East have some different whites, and they're buying the raw material, they're bringing them back to Italy, they're processing them and polishing them in Italy, and then they're adding old Italian names like Calcutta. But instead of like Calcutta Gold, which is like a real popular name, like Calcutta Storia, Calcutta whatever, and it sounds Italian, and what it really is it's a $3 material that they bought in India, that they brought over, processed it in Italy, and they're charging you $11. And if you just go back to India and buy the same thing, you're going to buy it at $3. But this is what's happening. They don't have enough raw material to supply everything they need, so they're constantly out there looking for new colors and materials, and regions in the country that might not, in the world I mean, that might not necessarily have the resources to produce the material. So they use their resources from Italy, and basically they're buying something as cheap as they can from someone that doesn't really know what value they have, and it's capitalism at its best and at its worst.
Well, and then I wonder too, if the folks in those quarries in India or in China, if they knew the value of what they had, would they not sell directly to the folks here in the United States, or are the only people out there asking for those materials in bulk? Is it the Italian factories?
No, the Indian factories sell as well. And again, like you're dealing with a third world country. So the way you communicate and some of the information you get is not very westernized. Like a lot of these different countries that you deal with, there's a different way of doing business. You tell someone something, and maybe it happens, and maybe it doesn't happen, and maybe it's supposed to happen in 2 weeks, but it happens in 7 weeks. And from their perspective, that's fine. That's the way they've done business for hundreds of years. And you start to do business like in a Western culture, where someone's waiting at the Hilton to get a bunch of material to finish some hotel rooms, and every single day costs them 50 grand that they're waiting. You can't wait 7 weeks. So they're very happy paying a higher premium from someone else that's getting material from a reliable source. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
It's the same thing as anything, as a sneaker, as a sock, as whatever. You see a lot of these offshoot brands that look like a Nike, wear like a Nike, don't sell at the same price or at the same cost as a Nike, and it's the same thing.
Interesting. So where are some of these other hot spots? You mentioned Turkey, you mentioned India. I know because you and I have talked before that Brazil is a hot spot for some quartzites. Where are the other, say you were to start a travel show around this topic, what's your first, second, and third stop?
Just because Europe is romantic, you'd have to start in Europe.
Okay.
You'd have to start in Carrara.
Okay.
Spain has some materials and stuff that aren't really popular anymore, but it's still a really rich culture. Portugal is great. You get a lot of limestones that come out of Portugal. And again, this is old. This is people that have owned the same factories for 200-300 years. Yeah. So I'd say Europe would be a great place to start. Brazil's really, really fun. And so this is an interesting thing, right? So we have this huge demand for granite, and then 90% of that market's gone over a 4, 5, 6 year period. And you have hundreds of factories set up all over the world. So what do? They buy the technology for quartz. They start taking their granite factories and converting them to quartz factories.
Right.
And that's what's happening right now.
Okay.
India, Turkey, a bunch of places in Asia. And they're starting to produce the material, and they're going to continuously drive the market down. And the market's going to have to evolve for that product to still have a more lucrative revenue stream.
Okay.
Brazil would be a great place to go. There's some small ceramic and stone manufacturers, even out of Mexico, surprisingly. There's cement pavers that come out of there with all those colorful drawings and diagrams and stuff that you see on them that are becoming really popular again.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So an endless supply of travel to be had in this industry.
An endless supply and
of stories to tell.
and just regressing to the last podcast that I did with you, I say creativity is a really big part of being an entrepreneur. Creativity is a really big part about visiting different quarries and stuff. So like for me, I'm always asking questions. I'm always asking about how production works, why production works like that, and then what happens to the stuff that's not getting produced. So a lot of the purchasing that I would do is I would say, hey, I'm at a quarry in Portugal. They're producing all this slab or all this tile, but yet they have a runoff that's like 8 inches by 46 inches. What do you do with that? Where does it go? So a lot of the stuff that I would bring in would be unique sizes and unique shapes that I'd be buying really, really inexpensive because I could see a use for it.
Yeah.
And I'd be selling it really high because no one else had it. Yeah. You know, so this creative thing comes, and like even on the granites and the marbles and the quartzites, you know, traditionally all they ever sold was polished material. Yeah. And then they started selling matte material. And then they started selling brushed material. Yeah. But 95% of the people out there are still stuck on selling just shiny material. Yeah. Like I've been selling different textures of material for 15, 20 years, and people are just starting to realize it because, again, it's that whole idea of knowing. Like I know this is what the market wants.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's stay on that and go towards what I think might be our last question. Sure. To kind of put a bow on this. You've talked a lot about changing trends. We're speaking now in January 2020, just to put some context around this conversation. What do you see happening in the future? Where are we going as an industry? What colors, what stones are going to be popular 5 years from now? If I'm building my kitchen now and I want something that is going to be, you know, people are just going to be coming around to this idea in 5 years, what would you recommend to that person? And where do you see this all going? I mean, I'll shut up now.
You know, it comes back to technology again. As technologies, I can't remember the word, but kind of like eating up different sectors of different marketplaces, the same thing's happening, right? Like quartz is eating up granite. Yeah. And the next phase is actually, it's porcelain tile. Yeah. So porcelain tile, traditionally you would see tile on a floor in your house, tile on the wall in your bathroom. And the technology now and the printing that they do and everything, they're able to produce full-size slabs in the porcelain.
Interesting. Okay.
And in the last 2 years or so, it started to come on the marketplace. They're using a tremendous amount in Europe, building cladding, so the front of buildings, counters, flooring. Okay. Instead of a traditional tile, they're using full slabs everywhere. And they're manufacturing this in all different kinds of thicknesses. We haven't quite caught up to the installation and the technical side over here. A lot of the fabricators, which are the people that cut and install the slabs, haven't really caught on to the technology. They have a lot of breakage, a lot of wastage. They're resistant to using the material because, again, they think they know something. Yeah. But this has happened already. Like, this is going to cannibalize a huge part of the quartz sales. It's going to cannibalize a huge part of the marble and the granite sales, you know, because they can copy anything. They can print any 3D image that you want.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this stuff is fascinating. And, you know, like it's interesting, like I'm doing this one house and I'm doing the whole outside of the house and I'm using wood look pavers. So this looks like if you were inside of my house and you looked on the floor and it looked like I had hardwood on the floor, the outside of the house is all going to look like it's a hardwood.
Cool.
And it's a paver and it's made with all this new technology and we can have any size we want. And it's going to change the way that we do everything inside and outside. And as this technology gets cannibalized once more out of like the high-end factories and it gets cannibalized back into China and it gets cannibalized back into Turkey and it gets cannibalized back into India, then the prices start coming down because it starts to be competition.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really, and just to throw out the last thing with all the anti-dumping fees, the anti-dumping fees that Trump instituted. Okay. We used to bring 80% of our material from China because the labor was so cheap. Now we bring 5%, right. 10%. Like all the quartz was getting manufactured in China. Yeah. Every single factory stopped being able to manufacture because the anti-dumping laws made it impossible to bring in. So now they're moving all these factories to different countries in Asia that don't have the anti-dumping laws, aren't like a global power like China is. Right. So it's a really interesting part of what's happening out there.
Interesting. Okay. So constantly evolving, constantly changing. tons of stories to tell,
Totally.
tons of new materials and new technologies that we haven't even seen yet, or technologies that are old that are being repurposed or refashioned for, current and modern and future use.
Yeah, and I think the technology that gets left behind in that is the human technology. Like there's some craftsmen out there that are doing some incredible things like all over the country and know stone and how to manipulate it and what to do with it and like that's like the human story. Like these are generations of craftsmen that are handling the stone. Like I think that's such a rich place to go have that conversation, and more on a human level than on a capitalist kind of level. And there's all these different places to go and talk and see and just like talking about Brazil, like literally you drive around the country and you see like it looks like a stone rock sticking out the side of the mountain or something, and you cut it off and you take a sample and you see if it's something you can sell. It's really cool. There's a lot of fun stories, a lot of history.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, maybe someday in the near future we'll see you on one of these journeys. I know after speaking with you over several months, this has become something that I've become really interested in. So, I look forward to hearing more about it. And I think you're a great resource, and I'll continue to come back to you and ask these types of questions. So I think that's it. We could probably go on and on. Maybe we leave room for part 3 of this conversation in the near future. But once again, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge to the listeners and the viewers out there, and to many more stories.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Nick. I appreciate it.